The last round of Norway chess was fantastically tense. 4 players shared the lead going to that final round. There was Magnus Carlsen, and then the 3 Americans, Nakamura, Caruana and So, with Anand and Aronian just a half a point behind them. Now there were some quick games. Carlsen drew very quickly with Vasily Grave, so he was hoping that the others would make a draw as well, and then there'd be a playoff. Nakamura drew fairly quickly with Aronian, so that meant Nakamura and Carlsen joint first, and then Anand beat Karyakin fairly quickly as well. So those 3, Anand, Nakamura and Carlsen, in the lead, and they had to wait for the result between Fabiano Caruana and Wesley So. If one of these players won the game, they would take outright first in the tournament. And it proved to be an unbelievably tense and exciting game right till the final moves. It was a Berlin, and instead of going for the endgame, Fabiano kept the tension by protecting the pawn on e4 with d3. And Wesley, well, both players select a continuation, which is pretty steady. I don't think, Fabiano hasn't played here the most critical lines really. This knight exchange certainly takes a lot of the tension out of the position, and it seems to me that black is already fine here. I mean, this has been played before, of course, but it's nothing special for white. And here, of course, black can just castle on the king side, and we have a very normal kind of Spanish position. But with bishop e6, this is the first sign that Wesley intended really going for his opponent. Of course, between the 2 Americans, there is a lot of rivalry. They want to be seen to be the best in the country. So Wesley starts his initiative, and with king h1 from Caruana with the idea f4, now we can see the idea behind h6. He plays g5 to prevent f4. This is very aggressive indeed. Now it could be that the king ends up on the king side. You can still castle king side, but well, with the knights coming to f5 with queen f3 and knight f5, you don't really want to do that. Wesley has something else in mind. Well, first of all, he breaks in the centre with d5. Rook e1 from Caruana and queen e7. Okay, so this is the sign. He's played bishop e6 and queen e7, and obviously intends going queenside, really aggressive. And here Caruana plays a4, which wasn't, well, as we'll see, wasn't that effective. Probably the most sensible thing to do is just to trade and then to break with d4. And, well, after exchanges here, the position is probably about even. You can also play e4, which is a bit more tense, but in any case, it's probably roughly level. That, well, objectively, that must be the most prudent way for white to play. But a4 and castles queenside from Wesley. So we've now got a really tense battle with kings on opposite sides of the board. And this a4 is slightly shooting in the dark. It's not exactly clear what this is doing. You can play a5, but then d4 is a good move, and that's rather awkward for the knight. If you trade, then you can see the bishop's diagonal is open, and that, of course, means that black's attack on the king side is going to be incredibly strong, and there's no danger for the king on c8 at all. So a5 not very effective. Probably the best again is to take here, then play a5, or let's say a6, and just drop the knight back. And in some cases you can start a storm here. Knight f1 is to preempt d4, and then maybe b4 and trying to break with b5. I mean, this is a very double-edged position. Instead, Caruana played rook b1, which is all very well. Of course, in principle, we would love to throw the b pawn forward, but then came d4, and this gives black the initiative. Well, once again, if this is traded, then black has a superb initiative on the king side. Knight f5, not so effective here. There's always the possibility to break with e4. Queen d6 is a good move with this idea straight away. And these bishops just don't look very effective at all. So this is unpleasant for white. The knight dropped back to f1. And here, well, Wesley played bishop b6, which is not a bad move. But it might have been more effective to go for it on the king side. So h5 is interesting. Just giving up this pawn and getting a really nice initiative here. And you can see that white's attack on the queen side, well, just is non-existent at the moment. You can also play knight d7 if you want to be slightly less adventurous. And with the idea of pushing those pawns down the board, that's possible. And g4, also very interesting with the idea, there's a very nice sacrificial idea. Of course, the knight wants to come into f4. And if white stops it with g3, well, it doesn't stop it. Knight f4 is a really dangerous piece sacrifice. This kind of sacrifice is very, very common in the Spanish. If you think with colours reversed, it's a really common idea. Don't have to accept the sacrifice, but anyway, that's the basic idea. But Wesley played, in a sense, a more positional move with bishop b6. But this does give white the chance to, play some funny stuff with a5 possibly. And I don't like Wesley's move here, bishop g4. I don't think that was strictly necessary. It certainly gives white time to find his feet, really. Bring the knight to a better square. And now rook hg8. b4, so the counterplay starts, and Fabiano is definitely back in the game now. Very tense situation. At first sight, it looks as though black could play very positionally here and make use of playing the bishop to b6. But in fact, this rather reminds me, in some senses, not the king positions, well, even the king positions actually, it reminds me a little bit of a Sicilian and a Najdorf with colours reversed. Because here, although this is a very bad piece and black has control here, you can play knight e2, drive the rook away, and the bishop comes out here, and black's king is getting squashed with pawns here. You can attack on the c-file. In fact, white has pretty good counterplay there. So after b4, Wesley pressed on with g4. Then a5. So this forces this trade on c3. The bishop doesn't really want to go back here. Then white's attack just rolls on. So taking, and the bishop finds the d4 square. So this was exchanged. And again, b5, those pawns really important to squash black's king. And the bishop, which did look pretty poorly placed on c2, comes to b3. And of course, if this is traded, then the knight will be able to sink itself on this wonderful square on f5. And the idea with just leaving the bishops there is that after the trade, then of course black can recapture with the pawn to cover the f5 square. But Fabi just threw the knight in anyway. And after this trade, the e-file is opened up, so there's pressure on e5. And now here, well, Wesley just protected the e-pawn with rook e8. If he trades, then white has a choice. You could play queen takes, but bizarrely, I mean, this is very unclear. Knight g4 certainly gives black play here, but bizarrely, pawn takes, which looks really ugly. These pawns all split, but in fact that pawn covers the g4 square. Very important. So prevents the knight coming in. There's still pressure here. And actually, well, let's just press with the pawns on the queen side. And you can occupy the g file. It's really interesting. And that bishop has a really nice diagonal here. And because the king is never going to be secure, then white has decent play here. In any case, we've just had this trade on f5, e5 pawn threatened, and rook e8 played by Wesley, protecting the e-pawn. Rook c1, a very natural move. Attacking here, of course, if b6 defending that pawn, then white will go straight on the attack on the a file, queen a2, and that looks, well, it looks fatal actually. It's terrible. But king b8 looks like the natural move just to get that king away from the c file. But Wesley had another idea in mind, an incredibly aggressive idea. He exchanged on f3. Now, I guess pawn takes pawn is possible here, but in queen takes pawn activates the queen on this diagonal, and when you've got moves like a6 coming, then this certainly feels like a good move. Rook d8, hitting the pawn, and now, very interesting moment. You could go a6 here, and one idea is to play into this endgame. And then you take the pawn on f7, then e4. So, well, if we count the pawns, what's the situation? Well, after rook takes pawn, then white is a pawn up. But this is very unclear, because that knight is such a strong blockader, and the bishop isn't so good here. And the king can also come up the board. That, well, Caruana didn't want that. I mean, he's certainly not worse. But he basically wanted to play more ambitiously here. He realized that actually he was really back in the game. So he played, you could say, a solid move, just protecting the pawn on d3, just keeping the tension in the position. And now Wesley absolutely went for it. He could have played knight g4. It's not a bad move. With the idea of h3 and then queen h4. And black is counterattacking here. Sometimes it's possible to play e4. I mean, after this, a6, e4, who knows what's going on in this position. It's incredibly tense. I mean, it's not the only way to play. You could play a6 straight away instead of h3. Again, e4. Take on b7 and queen c7 threatening mate. I mean, this is pretty random. You can play g3, you can play queen g3. White should be better here, but it's still very unclear. But Wesley went for it. Fabiano was actually running short of time. Wesley had time advantage. So he thought, this is my moment. And there's something very logical about this. You take and then you blockade with the queen, blocking the e-pawn, so that blocks out the queen. And then it's your turn to attack down here. And of course, the rooks now have a clear way through into white's position. Bishop takes pawn. Objectively, must be good for white, but now all bets are off. You could take on e4 here, but no, rook d3 played. Queen came back. And rook d4 now. I guess he played rook d4 because he didn't want this rook here to be shut out after bishop d5. And there is some kind of threat here. Bishop d5 anyway, so that threatens rook takes c5. And after, well, a move like b6, again, there are going to be problems on the a file. But Wesley plays here king d7. I mean, it's that kind of unexpected move where if you're short of time, then it's going to really throw you. I should add that they weren't playing with an increment in this tournament. So no 30 seconds added each time you make a move. It was proper time control, right down to the wire. So yeah, each time you make a move, that's it. No added time. I prefer the old time control like that. I think it's much better. It's less confusing. But here, rook takes pawn is still the correct move, because there's a threat to play here. So after rook d2, after queen takes, rook takes, basically you just force an endgame. This is the problem for black. White's too many pawns up in that position. So rook takes c5. Well, black would have to play something else, but with his king staggering around, I think should be good for white. But instead, Fabiano was thrown by this unexpected move, king d7, and he played b6. I think he was just expecting a6 to happen, then he'd maybe go rook c5 then. But instead, after exchanging, of course, black gains a tempo. And now the initiative swings over. So still 2 moves to make till the time control at move 40. He can't play queen h4 here, the move he would like to play, because of this tactical shot. Rook h3. Of course, if pawn takes, then queen h2 is mate. And after queen takes, not only do you win the queen, but you play rook d2 and it's going to be checkmate. So after knight g4, queen g1 forced. That's the 39th move. King d8 played. Again, a slightly unexpected move. White is still looking very good here. You could just take on b7. And in fact, black's threats aren't real. And at rook f1, also good. Instead, Caruana played h3. And this was a terrible mistake. The last move of the time control, his clock ticking down to 0. Wesley took on h3. So they've passed the time control. But bizarrely, Wesley made a move almost instantly. He should play rook d2 here. And this would force a draw. And by forcing a draw, that would have meant a 5-way playoff. A 5-way pile-up at the top of the tournament. This threatens rook h2. So the knight has to be taken. White is a rook and a bishop up, but the threat is to play queen here, and that forces queen g2. And after the check, this would lead to a draw by, whoops, I've pressed the wrong key, a draw by perpetual check like this. So when the king goes here, the king does not escape, and we have a draw by perpetual check. But incredibly, Wesley played instantly. He didn't reflect. I think the problem was he'd given up all hope. So he didn't expect to find a saving idea, and he played rook d3, threatening this. But now Fabiano had time to just make sure everything was okay. He played queen here, protecting the pawn. And white is a rook up. The best that black has is to play rook here, winning the queen. But white has just too many pieces, and it didn't take long for white to mop up here. This is the best way for white to play, actually. Of course, you can make a few checks here, but actually after, well, let's say check here, you can interpose, but in fact the king is completely safe on this side of the board, and this pawn is going nowhere. And in the meantime, we can take here, and yeah, it is totally winning for white. Wesley played h3, rook g1, and then e5. Well, that makes sure this pawn is never going anywhere. So, and the king is safe, and white is just going to mop up. So, incredibly, after losing his first round game to Magnus, Fabiano Caruana wins the Norway chess tournament outright. Congratulations to him, and what a year he is having. And that makes life interesting. So how does Magnus feel about that? Coming into their match in November, just shows that Fabiano is on excellent form, although Magnus has the very nice consolation that he did defeat him in round 1. Well, I'm delighted for Fabiano, and also it seems like a fitting conclusion to the tournament when you have a sole winner. So yeah, it feels right for the tournament anyway. Well, thanks for everyone for watching my videos during the tournament. If you enjoyed them, then don't forget you can subscribe. Just click the subscribe button, and if you want instant notification after that, do click the bell button as well. And if you want to support this channel, then do take a look at patreon.com. You can see the link in the video description, and you'll see the rewards you get for contributing to our costs. We would be very grateful. Thanks very much for watching. See you soon.